And we are live with Hank and Doug once again, bringing you. I'm not sure what are we calling this, Doug. This is our craft Q&A office hours, a
You got
brand
it.
new show that we're doing for you as part of our Dabble Premium extra stuff that we are launching this month. Doug, I'm going to pop over to Instagram and get this stream started. Take it away. Tell folks what we're here to do and what they can
All
expect.
right. Well, some people might say that we're here just as another excuse for you and I to chat and have a good time live. But
And they
I would
wouldn't be
say to them,
wrong.
yeah, I'd say to them, nay, that's not the case. Rather, this, like you mentioned, this is another new thing that we're bringing to Dabble Premium. And since it's the month of May, we are bringing this to all dabblers. So everyone can see if premium is worth upgrading to, or if you enjoy the content, if you just want to hang around. Um, so this is our craft Q&A office hours, and it's mostly inspired by the fact that every time we do a live event like this, or if we send out an email or whatever, whenever we reach out to our awesome dabblers, we get a bunch of questions in return. And unfortunately, like when I was doing the workshop last week, we were talking about a very specific topic, and we got some questions that I just couldn't, for the sake of everybody that was attending the workshop, I couldn't dive into what I wanted to dive into with that question because we were there for a reason. So
Right.
this is kind of a two-parter. We're helping you out by answering the burning questions you have about the craft of writing and storytelling, and we are going back and making sure that people who have the questions get the answers that they're looking for, and you're not just kind of left out in the cold.
Right. Do me a favor, anyone that is watching, if you are joining along with us, would you mind commenting over in the comment section what platform you're watching on? Are you watching on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter/X or Instagram? We have been working to bring all of these different platforms into our live broadcast, and that's what I'm doing over in the background is checking all of these to see how that's working. Just tell us where you're coming from if you don't mind. That would help us a lot to just see what our reach is like right now.
I do see I have on my phone down here Instagram pulled up, and it is working. So
Awesome.
it's so we have some folks over there. So hello everybody over on Instagram. Robert
Yeah.
joining us on YouTube.
And I
Awesome.
see that we are streaming on Instagram, and I see that we are streaming on Facebook as well. So,
Excellent.
YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter/X. Looks like
All the dabblers.
all the dabblers, all the wheels are spinning right now. So that's amazing.
And for those of us just joining on Instagram, or anyone who's joined in since we started up here, we are these. This is our new craft Q&A office hours where we take user submitted questions, whether through a form that we sent out this morning, or through comments, or through chats during our live streams, and answering them here so that you don't feel left out. So, I think without further ado, Hank, we should probably get to the first one. Right.
All right. Richard, watching on Facebook. I've seen more about Dabble in the past week on Facebook. Excellent, Richard. That's what
Awesome.
we wanted to hear. Thank you
Yeah.
for joining us.
Yeah, we want to bring you that valuable content wherever you choose to spend your social
Yeah.
media time.
Wherever you live is where we want to be.
All right, so I'm gonna pop up one of the questions that we got
All
here,
right.
Hank, and that is, how can I effectively convey a message in my book without coming across as preachy? And that's a heck of a question.
That is a heck of a question. And since I just saw these questions about 10 minutes ago, I've been
Ah,
I've been pondering over this for just a minute. But I think that the first reaction I had to this question, Doug, was the best way that I've found to convey something that I want to say, but not it sound like Hank is telling you this, is to have a character in the book go through a situation or convey information that is consistent with their character that I have built for the reader. Um, the 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 thing that you don't want to do is to have a character that you have created and allowed the reader to have a relationship and then them do or say something that is completely out of character for what the reader expects. So that's what I would say to that is have a character experience this, say this, whatever, but have it come from a place that is in line with the expectations you've already set for that character.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I give my 2 cents on it, just want to say good evening to Ilsa and hello to Patricia. Thank you for joining us once
Hello.
again. But for I think you're spot on with that, Hank. I think consistency is one of the strongest things that you can have in your writing, especially when it comes to characters. Like your characters will change. That's how character arcs work, but they have to be consistent in the choices and actions that they take during that. And that's just a very powerful way of sharing a theme.
Right.
What I was going to say is you really want to focus on practicing your show don't tell skills, because any message, any theme will come across as preachy if you directly state it and if you say it over and over again. Like if you had a character outright say, good will always triumph over evil, that's just kind of cheesy, right? That's a little
Right.
cringy. But if you have them making choices that are always good despite the personal consequences, then you're showing that message through their actions, and it feels a lot more natural, and it feels a lot more true to the character.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But
Absolutely.
show don't tell is one of the hardest things for writers
Yes.
to do. I think that takes a lot of practice to get right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I will
Also,
do.
if anyone watching would like to, offer up a suggestion or comment that you might have about any of these questions, please feel free to chime in. We are here to learn from each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. The whole point of this is to have a more open forum. So if you have questions, whichever platform you're on, please feel free to comment or chat it, or whatever the function is where you are. What I am going to drop in the chat here that I hope goes cross-platform is a link to some show don't tell worksheets that we have over on W. And I see that went on Facebook and YouTube. So hopefully it shows up on the Instagram side of things as well.
Yeah, I'm not
Robert
sure
dropping in the
how
chat there.
not sure how Twitter is handling that. I don't see that comment pop up on the Twitter feed, but if you want to see the links that are posted here, pop over to YouTube and you can check the comments there, and you'll be able to
Yeah.
find them.
And we'll put it in the description as well for
Yeah.
anyone watching after the fact here.
Yes.
Robert said in the chat, I think it's good to have the antithesis of the message also present in your story to provide contrast and perspective. Excellent point. I think that's a
Yes.
fantastic
Excellent
point,
point.
Robert. And especially when you get to like morally ambiguous or gray messages that you want to share, you need
Right.
that contrast to explain why one side is better. Excellent. All
Yes.
right, let's move on to our next question then, which is one that came up during our workshop last week, and that's how many words a day on a second draft is reasonable? And that's a tough question, so I'm going to let Hank go first.
Thanks, Doug. Um, eh, I don't know that there's an answer to that. It's going to depend on so many factors, and it also is going to depend on your writing slash editing style. We talked with Michael Laron the other day, and he talked about a method that he uses called, I think he called it cycling, where he writes 500 words or 1,000 words and then cycles back to the beginning of what he wrote and does an editing pass on that and then moves forward for another 500 words. And what he was getting at was that at the end, when most people complete a first draft, he's completed a first, second, sometimes a third draft all in one pass. And he said that he produces, nearly pristine drafts at the end of that. So he kind of incorporates it into his first draft. Some people try to set a goal of 1,000 words per day in writing that first draft. But then maybe when you're going over a second draft, maybe you want to slow down and really contemplate the things that you've written and think through how this might change, or how you might could elaborate on something, and maybe 500 words is more in line with what is moving your story forward. I think that the most important thing is finding out what moves your story forward, what keeps momentum, and what is best for your story and your writing style. And I know that that is not a good answer, but that's the best answer I have at the moment.
It's a very tricky one.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so I think you also need to determine what it looks like to be working on your second draft. Like for some people, it might be entirely scrapping a chapter and writing it from like a fresh sentence, right? Like you aren't happy with it, but maybe the bones are there, so you're just going to tackle rewriting it the whole way. For other people, it might just be doing spot checks throughout, fixing up verbiage here or plugging a plot hole there that just uh, doesn't require a whole lot more than just maybe half an hour's worth of work or 200 words worth of work. But
Right.
if you're going for a true fresh second draft, like if you have 100,000 word book and you say, okay, I've done well, but I really want to just rewrite from the beginning, then you're treating it like another first draft. You just have more behind you to help out. So that again, like Hank said, is not a great answer for some people, but it depends on you. It depends on how much time you can dedicate, how quickly you can write, what your process is like. The trick, I
Yeah.
think, more than anything else, and this is for writing and revising, is just be consistent with it,
Right.
right?
And one piece of advice that I consistently hear from a lot of people, and this is not true for everyone, Michael LeBron specifically would be someone that differs from this, is that a lot of people try to get that first draft out as quickly as possible, get through the story, go from point A to point Z, and all
Me too.
points in between. um, so you're thinking about drafting that first draft quickly, but then your second draft, third draft, you may want to slow that way down. So the whole idea of setting a word count goal for this part of the process is is maybe the wrong way to be thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah, and again, depends entirely on what your process is. Because I am very much one of the people that I want to finish that first draft so I can go back and make it better. I know that the words I'm choosing for my timed writing sprints are not going to be the really descriptive, evocative ones that I want in the final
Right.
draft. But for me, my process is that sort of spot checking, spot editing, improving bits at a time rather than rewriting entire passages. I
Right.
find that if I'm redoing a chapter, giving it a whole new facelift kind of thing, I'm not even considering it revising at that point. I'm just considering it writing again.
Right. Exactly.
And we have, yeah, it was Patricia's question last week. Yeah, we tackled it a little bit. Then I think there was a lot going on in the comments too, which was nice. I love seeing people chat back and forth in the comments.
Yeah.
Here, I'll put that on screen so everyone else on the other platforms can see it. But I do tend to write on the first draft a scene at a time, then go back and do an edit. Absolutely, for sure. That, and like you said, Hank, that's what Michael Laron does. He has 90 books. I can't argue with that process.
Yeah, I've got like 8 novels on my shelf, and, I felt good about myself until I
Yeah.
met Michael, you know? Yeah.
All right. And so let's go to our next question then. Um, Here we go. What do you do if you find yourself wandering too far off track with your story, but you hate outlining? I
Mm.
love outlining. So I really need to put myself in that space of someone who doesn't like outlining.
Okay,
Do you have
I
any initial
hate
thoughts, Hank?
outlining. Yeah, I hate outlining. I have learned to outline. So this is where I fall on the pantser versus plotter spectrum. I don't think that that either one of those hard camps are true for most people. I do know a handful of people who meticulously outline. I'm talking about down to, each chapter, each scene
Mhm.
is a page long of outline, and There's nothing left to guess when the drafting comes. Um, I think most people don't fall there. Um, I tend to think of I like the metaphor of a road trip across country. If you're going from South California, so like San Diego, to Maine or somewhere in the upper northeast of America, there's a lot of different ways you can get there. You know where you're starting, you know where you're ending, and maybe we nail down that we're going to go along the south, and then when we get to the east coast, then turn and go north. That's one way we could go. We could go right across the center of the country and just kind of split the middle. And if we do that, we know we're going to go through St. Louis, and then maybe Chicago, and then over to New York, and then turn and go. There are certain points that we lay out. Now, how we get from St. Louis to New York may be a mystery, and there could be all sorts of things that happen in there. Um, but I like to kind of designate things that I know were gonna happen in the story, and then allow myself to the freedom to just kind of figure out what's happening in between there. So, what do I do if I find myself wandering too far off track? That's why I set kind of waypoints in the story. Um, I I don't really start writing a story until I know where I'm gonna end up. Now, the endings can change, but I have a destination in mind, and I have several sub destinations along the way. You call those tent poles. Use whatever metaphor you want. But I think that helps me to stay on track. That gives me the freedom to feel the story as I'm writing it, and to let my characters become who they want to become, while also giving me something to keep my eyes on along the way. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of a hybrid of a pantser and a plotter. I pants the places in between the plot points, if that makes, and that
Yeah.
has worked really well for me. I don't get lost. A hardcore plotter will tell you one of the downfalls of pantsing is that you'll just sit at your desk and not know what to type and just flit around. And if you have some waypoints along the way that you're shooting toward, you don't have that problem. The conundrums are smaller. How am I going to get from St. Louis to Chicago? That's much better than I'm just sitting at the keyboard and have no idea what to type.
Yeah.
Those are manageable problems.
I like that. I
That's
like
how
that
I
a
think
lot.
about it anyway.
Yeah, I will. I noticed on Instagram, this is our first time live streaming to Instagram, and they're making us jump through a lot of hoops
Yeah.
unlike the other platforms. But I saw that Chris Cole Books commented on the Instagram live stream that when they're too far off course, they try to type a few summary paragraphs about what's going to happen in the scenes moving forward and how to get where they want to go. Still allows them creativity as a pantser. I think that's a fantastic idea. In fact, I adopted something along those same lines because I ran into a bit of a slump in my current draft, and I just didn't know. Like I knew where I wanted to get after the next couple of scenes, but the in between there, the stuff in St. Louis, I don't know what I wanted to do. So I did type up it wasn't paragraphs for me, it was jot notes, but tomato, tomato. It's whatever works for you. It's getting those ideas out and giving you that outline. And for
Right.
me, this book that I'm working on, I'm plotting less and I'm pantsing more than I have traditionally. And there have been some learning curves, and there have been some scenes that have needed substantial rewrites. So I think if you find that you wander too far off track, you either need to understand that you can go back and scrap what you've written. It might feel like wasted time, but you learned what you don't want your story to be, which I think is
Yeah.
valuable. Or you can take what you wrote and kind of reuse it or repurpose it
Th-
either later in the book or in a different book or something, right? It's
that's what I
very
was.
sorry, go
No,
ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's very rare that creativity goes to waste
Right.
once you've written it down. You can find a way, if not directly repurposing it, taking nuggets from it and forming something else somewhere else.
Yeah. I was gonna say, and Robert's comment, when he said, "When I wander off track, I often have to make a tough decision and burn a chapter or 2 until I'm back to a place where I felt that I had clear direction." You could definitely take that approach, or, you could take um, the I'm drawing a blank here, the improvisational comedy approach of yes and
Hmm.
where when you're improving with another person, you have to take what they say and then figure out what to do with it. If you're going to be a true pantser, you could take the improv approach and say, okay, well, this is what my subconscious gave me. Let me figure out something to do with it. And
Hmm.
that there may be gold in that. There may not be. Maybe you need to
Yeah.
burn those chapters after all. But take the freedom to explore it and see where it goes. If you've got that kind of time.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to talk to somebody about it either. If you have a critique partner or a writing group, or just a partner that you chat when you're really excited about your story, but otherwise they're like, yeah, that's cool, Doug, just keep doing your little writing thing over there. That's like, talk to other people about it, and even if you don't get relevant feedback from them, it's still something where you can exercise your own creativity out loud, and sometimes
Right.
that'll lead to ideas.
Right.
We do have Ilsa here saying, if I'm stuck, I tend to write a few different scenes outside my manuscript and choose the ones that I like best. I think that's really cool too. I've
I
never
like
thought
that
about
idea.
that, but
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's just give your brain different options about how to move forward, and also don't feel constricted. Like if you do go with Ilsa's method, then it might be that one scene works really well right now, but maybe a week or two later you actually double back and choose one of the other scenes. Right?
Yeah.
Like give yourself that kind of flexibility.
Yeah. By the way, we're having a high pollen day today, so I keep muting my mic and coughing and drinking something. So I'm sorry if I'm being distracting.
There was a tree just as I was getting ready for this that I walked under, and flowers fell into my head from it. And so I saw one just before we got started. I'm like, oh.
Ooh,
All right.
like this coronation day.
Is there such a thing as too long for a first draft? I will say no, with
Mm,
the caveat that it depends on what you want to do with your book. And this is
right.
another question that came up, I think, during the workshop, or it might have been at another time, but it's, if you plan on traditionally publishing, the publisher will have limits on what they're willing to accept from a first time author. And that boils down to risk and cost and return, and because they are a business, right? And you are a potential asset to them, so they're going to treat you like an asset. And if you aren't going to make money because your book costs $20 to print or something, then
Right.
they're not gonna go with it. But if it's your first book ever, you're writing for fun, or maybe you're going the indie publishing route, the self-publishing route, then it's a little more nuanced as to whether there's too long of a first draft.
Well, and when I first saw this question, my initial thought was, is there such a thing as too long for a first draft?
Hmm.
No. And you're absolutely right about what the publisher is going to think about your word count, because you can Google this. It's not hard to find what kind of expected word counts are for a particular genre and even subgenres within a genre. There are standards of what publishers are willing to print, bind, and market. But you should never be sending a first draft to a publisher anyway.
Hmm.
So that's why I say, is there a such thing as too long for a first draft? No, is especially if you're figuring out your characters and but then that second draft, that third draft, maybe even a fourth draft is where you're going to identify those scenes and those elements of context that informed you as the writer as to who this character was, what the setting was, and maybe it doesn't do anything for the story, but it did something for you as the writer. Those things can be trimmed because you learned what you needed to learn about the character, about the setting, about plot point. And then when you finish that first draft, you take that first drafter hat off and you put that editor hat on. And that's when you take a critical eye and you look for things that can be cut, that will allow the story to say the same thing that you wanted it to say, but also make the story stronger. Sometimes it's kind of like if you're a musician, if you a great blues musician knows not only all of the notes to play, but what notes not to play. It's where you don't play that shows your genius sometimes, and a lot of times as a writer, it's the things you don't say, or it's the not spelling everything out for the reader and allowing context clues and things like that to make the story stronger.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot I can add to that because I think you hit the nail on the head right there. The only thing that I will add is that if you are considering traditional publishing, no, your first draft shouldn't be going out. But if you know, hey, I'm writing a thriller and this publisher likes 75,000 words, don't write 150,000 words, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
trimming so much will be exhausting and you'll hate it and the story will be radically different. But
Yes.
I can't remember who told me this, but someone that I respected enough to listen at the time said that when you're editing your first draft, you're probably going to cut about 10% of the words.
Yeah.
And that might not be true for everyone, but it's certainly been true in my experience. At least 10% of the words, just to get it down to something more concise, something more readable that flows better. So no, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Hank, that there's
Yeah.
no too long for a first draft. Just be prepared for that editing after.
R
You're gonna have to,
right.
as they say, kill your darlings.
Yeah.
Um,
And,
that's gonna be a lot of
the
words.
the writer that wrote The Notebook and, that whole string of book, Nicholas Sparks, is that his name?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw an interview with him one time, and he said, that his published drafts tend to be about 90 to 100,000 words, and he consistently writes 120 to 130,000 word first drafts, knowing full well that he's gonna cut 20 to 30,000 words. And that made me sick to my stomach. I was like, "Why would you write all those words knowing that you?" But, he's sold 4 bajillion books and,
Yeah.
who am I to knock his process? But he understands his process and he knows what the deal is gonna be from the get-go, and he has a way of figuring it out, so good on him.
Mhm. I'm gonna pop up Ilsa's question here. When do you decide your draft is finally finished enough for someone else to read? That is a very subjective question. All of these are
Mm,
subjective, which
yeah.
is why we're here because we can't just give like one sentence answers
R
in a
right,
comment.
right.
For this, I would say, well, do you have any initial thoughts, Hank, before I dive too deep?
Go ahead, go ahead.
All right.
I'm still thinking on this one.
Your draft will be finished before you think that it's finished. There
I agree with
there will
that.
be like, you're going to want to revise and revise and revise until you're bleeding from the eyes and your family's worried about you.
Right,
Especially if it's your first book or your first couple books, you're so excited about it, you're so emotionally attached to it that the idea of somebody else reading it is scary and you want to perfect it before
right,
that happens. But there comes a time when you just kind of have to realize, hey, I've spent however much time on this, like I'm on, version 7. What you're doing is no longer actually benefiting your work at that point, and I think you're just kind of making excuses. Sounds a little harsh, but like you're justifying your own almost fear of other people looking at something that's very close to you, and that's
right.
understandable. Like that's
Yeah.
not a critique of people who feel that. But yeah, I think for me, and Hank, I'd like to know your process after. But I finish my first draft, and then I'll go through and revise, and it'll usually be some substantial more line edits than developmental or structural edits. And
Right.
then maybe I'll give it one more pass through to look for any errors that have slipped through. And then I want feedback on it, like maximum 3, sometimes 2 passes. And then I want other eyes because my eyes aren't good enough to to get
Yeah.
everything in my story.
Right. And I heard a statistic from someone somewhere along the way that said that when you're editing, if you see a mistake, I think it was 3 times, your brain will never recognize that mistake again. You'll just gloss over it after that. So, and maybe that is more pertinent to like grammatical mistakes or spelling mistakes or punctuation,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. If you've got a comma in the wrong place and you have looked over it 5 times, you just will stop seeing that wrong comma. So, there is a thing as seeing too much of your own work, and uh, but yeah, I agree with you that um, do that first draft, get a little space from it for a few days. I think Stephen King says in On Writing that he puts a book in a desk drawer for a month at least before coming back to it. I don't know anyone else that's that patient, and mo- I know I'm not. But you give yourself some space and time. Go on a short weekend trip or a vacation or something, just to clear your mind. Come back to it and try to look at it again with that editor hat and not your drafter hat. And identify, does is the plot consistent from beginning to end? Do the characters behave consistently? Do they grow? But is their growth consistent with what I've laid out for the reader? Is this believable? Look for things like that. Look for obvious holes, patch those things up. And then, kind of work through, begin with the obvious structural things, fix those. Then can I polish the prose up? Can I make this sound better? Can I say this sentence better? Do things like that. Then work on the spelling, grammar, punctuation, things like that. And then at that point, when you know that there are no glaring holes, um, you've polished the prose as well as you can. Um, then get some feedback.
Mhm.
Let someone else read it. I'm with you. I wouldn't go more than 3 passes without getting some outside feedback.
Mhm.
Because if you've got a major problem with the book that you just can't see because you've become too close to it, that I don't care how many passes you go over and over and how pretty how purple you make a particular sentence. You need to let another set of eyes take a look.
Yeah,
As
and I
hard as
would
that is, because writing is laying your soul bare for someone else to critique and pick apart.
add to this that you want to be intentional about who you are getting feedback from as well, because it's,
Yes,
in my
that's a
opinion, it's a
whole
lot.
other
Yeah,
discussion.
that is a whole other discussion, and then we'll chat about where that discussion is taking
Yeah.
place in just a sec. But the sending your work to like your dad, your sister, your best friend, that to me is a lot more vulnerable because they're so close to you, they know you
Right.
personally, as opposed to getting a couple writing friends that are in the same boat as you, or maybe where you want to be in a couple years, or an editor, or like a critique partner. If you find someone who has been there before, or is currently there, or understands the writing process, then you're going to feel a lot more confident in sending off your work for feedback, because they are doing it for you, like for your craft, whereas your parent, your sibling, your friend is doing it for you because they want to support you personally, and that's just a different emotional feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I will
And
say here on YouTube and everywhere, now that we have this linked up, we will be hosting Feedback Friday, our first Feedback Friday. So any dabblers that have an email account, pretty much, you got an email this morning that had the form to submit a question for this. But there's also a form to submit a sample of your writing for Feedback Friday, where one person will be drawn, and I'll provide line editing feedback, and Robert, my colleague, will provide beta reader feedback, and then we'll go over bits and pieces of it live here. We'll chat about things that we think people will benefit from, and we'll give a little sneak peek into the feedback process. So if that's something you're interested in. We've already had a bunch of submissions. Check your inbox, because there's some other goodies in there for you as well.
yeah, and I will probably be lurking in the comments harassing people. So
All right. Let's next question here. I keep changing the book title. Is this normal for beginners? This
Yes.
is like an easier question for us. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah,
It
it's some I've had books that, that I knew the title was the first thing that I ever got. When I wake up in the morning, I have a title. Okay, what does this title mean? And then it grows out of that title. That has absolutely happened. I've had other books that I've written that I don't know the title until I'm completely finished, and it's somewhere in the editing process that it reveals itself to me. Whatever magic happens with around book writing, you know, it it just happens differently. Sometimes I get it up front. Sometimes it's at the end. Sometimes I'll publish a book and then wish that I had titled it something different.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's it. You either know the title right off the bat, or it comes to you later, or you change your mind. There, I, it's not abnormal. I don't
yeah,
think changing it is the most common thing. I think a lot of people will land on their title at first, but there is nothing wrong with changing your title.
yeah.
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all. Yeah,
All right. I appreciate how short that question or those answers were as well. A nice
right.
little break. I have much to write when I'm at work, but not much when
Mm.
I'm on my PC. Any advice, Hank?
Oh man. Wow, I've experienced this before, that when I'm unable to write, there's something about disengaging your brain from the whatever mode you're in when you're creating, and then allows your subconscious to just go nuts. And then when you sit down, the pressure of, okay, I'm at the keyboard, I'm supposed to write, and then nothing, happens. Um, when you have those moments of inspiration, write them down. I've interviewed some authors before that say crazy stuff like, um, you know, if I get an idea for a book, I don't write it down, because if it was an important idea, it'll be there when I need it. I have never trusted myself to that extent. I write it down, because I don't trust that I'm gonna remember it ever. So find a way to jot a note down, or in a way that will trigger what this thought process was, that was, um, and then take those scraps of notes with you, to your writing desk when you do get the time. As far as I'm concerned, that's about the best advice I can give you, is to just w- jot notes down that will trigger that thought process. And then, you may be the type of writer who will benefit from more structured outlining. Maybe you need the kind of structure that when you come to your writing desk at the end of the day, you've got a scene planned out and you know what you need to write. Some people can get away with not doing that, but some people need that. They need a roadmap to go with.
Yeah. Yeah, and while I add on to that, Hank, I will ask a favor of you to find that link that you shared last week about downloading Dabble on your phone, because I
Yes.
think it depends a lot on your job too. If you're
Yes.
at a job where you can access your phone, well, shameless plug, you can just pull up Dabble and type, type, type away. That's not the norm. Not everyone has that benefit. When I was writing my first book, I was I had a summer job working at Canada's Wonderland, which is a theme park a little bit down the road from here, biggest one in Canada, I think. And I was manning a snack booth, a snacking concession stand out on the footpath, and it was pouring rain one day, and so I
Oh,
just
no.
forced some receipt paper out of the printer, grabbed a pen, and just started jotting down notes about the story I wanted to tell. And then I shoved that in my pocket, and later I had that receipt in my hand, and it was transcribing it into Dabble. Um, so you if inspiration seems to only come when you're at work, then yeah, jot down those notes whenever possible. But then I also challenge you to try and find uh, opportunities to just kind of sit your butt down and just type, and let
Yeah.
whatever you type be bad. But the more that you kind of force yourself through the bad, the cleaner it's going to get, and the more you'll find that you're inspired when you're not at work.
Yes.
Awesome. And we have those links in the chat there for
Yeah.
installing the mobile app. Awesome.
Yeah, and they should pop up on Facebook and YouTube. And there's one article that is for Apple devices, and the other article is for Android devices.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to pop up another question here that I'm so glad someone asked, because it's like they wrote it for me. But I do promise this came from from a chat participant. Will this month's events be available to watch on YouTube? Yes,
Heck yeah.
absolutely. And for anyone just joining us, this whole month we are introducing new features to Dabble Premium in the forms of guest workshops, workshops put on by us, Writing Sprint Wednesdays, this craft Q&A office hour format, the Feedback Fridays, the email deep dives that you got in your inboxes this morning, with resources all around. And for this month, it is available for free for all dabblers, and everything that we do, including this live stream, will live on our channel for you to watch whenever you want, even when the month is over. So yes, don't worry if you can't make it to some of our events.
Yes.
Um,
And everything that we that if we ever broadcast live on YouTube, those are archived on YouTube under the live tab on our page, on the Dabble page, for as long as we have a YouTube channel. They are there.
Yep. All right. Here's an interesting question. Any tips on ensemble cast relationships? Think Ocean's 11 with a large crew, each specialized. How do you manage a larger cast of characters and their interactions? I think can I take a stab at this one, Hank?
Please, because this is not my strong suit. I tend to write very narrow view, so yeah, take a stab at it.
Wonderful. I do. Before I dive too deep, author DL White said on YouTube, I like writing via Dabble on my iPad with a keyboard. Works great for travel. Hank, you are a big fan of that portable writing lifestyle.
Yes, absolutely. And author DL White, I have an old Android phone. It's a Google Pixel 3A that I retired a number of years ago, that's been sitting in a desk drawer. I got a Bluetooth typewriter style keyboard, and that has the little tray that holds your device, and I pop it in there, and the only thing installed on that old phone is Dabble. And it only works with Wi-Fi connection, because it's a phone that's out of service, so it's not connected to cell service. So at home, I will open up Dabble on it, make sure that all my projects are synced, and then I'll go somewhere away from home, or sometimes I'll just go out on the patio or something, and I'll open it up, and it's just my work in progress. That's all I can see. I see about 6 lines of text, and I just go nuts, and I love it so much. It has freed up my chasing squirrels, distraction of everything that's on my desk from my day job.
I will say, and I'm going to take this question down so I don't confuse anyone for a moment here. One of the things we chatted about in the workshop last week is getting sort of those manufactured inspired moments in for writing when you can, or as Michael Laron calls it, writing in the cracks of life.
Right.
And just 2 days ago, I was meeting up with my brother and some of his friends for dinner, because he's getting married in the fall, and so it was the wedding party all getting together. And I was earlier than all of them, which I want to say is uncharacteristic of them, but it is not. It is so far from not being uncharacteristic of them. So I had a good 20, 25 minutes sitting in the restaurant by myself, and I
Wow.
pulled out my phone and I just wrote, right? And I think when I write articles for W, or when I chat about Dabble in a forum like this, I'll mention, hey, it's available on your phone. And that might not seem like a huge deal. But for authors, when you're tackling such a large book, getting in that bonus 500 words is a fantastic feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if it's just giving yourself some shorthand notes in there, so that when you do get to if you're more comfortable working at your computer, leaving yourself some notes there that will, like we talked about it a few minutes ago, that will trigger
Mhm.
that creative thought process that you were in, and that's crucial,
Yeah.
crucial.
All right, back to this question. Tips on ensemble cast relationships, like Ocean's
Ooh.
11. I like this question because I write fantasy, and in fantasy, you tend to have a lot of characters, right?
Right,
Especially the grander the quest, the bigger the party, the more people they come across, that
right.
sort of thing. My gut instinct is to be a little sassy, a little spicy. Just practice being a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons because you are managing an ensemble cast
Right.
impromptu. And I think that's where a lot of my practice comes from. But for people who can't do that or don't want to, which I don't understand, but you do you, um, you need to
Speaking of sassy.
you need to look at your crew, your cast, and understand why each individual is in your story. And that boils down to the protagonist and their journey, the conflict that they're going after, their goals. But then looking at the secondary characters and asking what they contribute to the story. And I'm not trying to say that certain characters will be unimportant and that you should remove them, though that might be the case. But you should think if this character, let's say Gimli had like a second cousin that was also at the fellowship meeting, and maybe he made a joke and he goes along, but he doesn't actually have an arc. He doesn't contribute to other characters. He's just a tertiary character, he's a background character. Then you don't need to devote screen time to that character. So first you need to set expectations about what characters are doing for you in your plot and kind of portion out the time that you dedicate to them based on that. The other thing I would mention is that based on that information, you don't want to exclude anybody that shouldn't be excluded. If someone has their own dedicated arc or they're important for a plot or a subplot, you need to make sure that you're balancing that time appropriately. And one of the things that I did for my past book, because it was the biggest party that I ever had, is I used color coded labels in Dabble to mark which scenes were told from which perspective or had which character in them. And that at a glance, whether you do it in Dabble or you do it on a piece of paper, you do it on a corkboard, getting that kind of 5,000-foot view or whatever the saying may be,
Mhm.
um, it will let you see, hey, I've dedicated way too much time to the secondary character and not enough time to this relationship that I want to build between the protagonist and somebody else. Like, it will
Right.
give you that perspective.
Well, and if you're using the plot grid and you're
Mhm.
able to zoom out, like you talked about that 50,000-foot
Uh,
view or whatever,
50,000 is a lot higher
you
up
know,
than 5,000.
just saying, if you're looking out the window of an airplane, I think that's
Very low flying
regardless of the
airplane.
metaphor, whatever. That's a great idea of the colored labels, because then you can see, okay, I've got this view, I've got this view, and then you can track it along as the story progresses to make sure those things are coming to a head, these different perspectives are, merging somewhere,
Mhm.
moving the plot, ahead appropriately.
Yep. You also need to keep in mind that for you as the author, you're a lot closer to the source material than a reader will be. So you
Yeah.
might think that, Jimbo, who's normally in the background, should get more time on the page, but realistically for the reader, he doesn't need more than a line or two now and then, and somebody seeing him doing something or him like showing him going and doing something else. And I think that's where feedback comes in that we were just talking about, is if this seems like a struggle for you or if you're worried about it, make sure you point out that concern to beta readers or critique partners or editors and get their feedback on it, because you might just be too close.
Right. I
All
I
right,
don't
I
have
think
anything to add to that.
perfect. Do we have time for one more question?
Let's do it.
Okay. Uh, I'm just scrolling through our list here. I guess we'll go with this one. Any tips on managing love triangles? Well,
Don't
my
get
first
into
tip.
one.
Yeah.
Uh, that concludes our broadcast for today.
Save it for fiction.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
my first tip: check your inbox because we did just post a deep dive on relationships. And in that, you'll get a free downloadable resource of our relationship arc checklist, which includes a piece on love triangles. Hank, do you have anything you want to kick this off with, though?
I really don't. Love triangles. I would I mean this may seem simplistic, but have a goal in mind when you start writing this love triangle. I would think that knowing how what the resolution to that would be um is going to help you in navigating that. I don't really have a I've never written a love triangle, so I'm not exactly sure how to properly navigate that.
I'm making a prop real quick so that
Okay.
I can hold it up in front of the screen here. It's a triangle.
Mm.
Spoiler. Oh my goodness, it's an ugly. Okay,
Don't bury the lead. Mm,
triangle, right?
yeah,
Um, something that a while ago I used to think that a love triangle was a silly name for it because really it's like a love V, right? You have two people competing for one
right.
individual
Yeah,
or one person deciding between two. Realistically, that's not the case. So if you're thinking about including a love triangle, you need to identify that there are three corners to the triangle and there is conflict along each and in between. So the two people competing for the one love interest will have clear conflict. Right? There will be
right.
some rivalry. They're after the same thing. Only one person in most stories can get it. Then there will be the person who's being pursued and the two interests. And there will inevitably be conflict there because this person is not deciding. And just the way that stories are, there is conflict between characters. That's what makes things interesting. And then there's just the nature of the triangle itself will lead to its own sort of conflict generated outside of the individual interpersonal conflicts. So so if you want to write a love triangle, you really need to double down on making interesting characters and then make them get into a conflict with one another and make those individual conflicts and the group conflict interesting. Um, and like when I think of love triangles, obviously, well, obviously for me, I think about Twilight, right? And I think about
Right.
Bella and Jacob and Edward, and Bella had a story with Jacob and a story with Edward, right? And
Right.
some people might be pulling their hair out because they think that's the worst love triangle of all time, but bear with me because I think it's the most well-known love
Or
triangle of
wolf
all
with
time.
me, whichever.
Yeah. But you need to, in addition to having those conflicts, you need to dedicate time to each leg of that
Right.
triangle. And then you
Right.
also need to dedicate time to the two people pursuing the one interest to have their own time eh, making that conflict come to life. So it's really get the conflict right and then give enough screen time to make the love triangle relevant. Otherwise, it's just going to feel cheap too.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
that's my advice on love triangles. As someone who doesn't write romance, but love triangles aren't just for romance. Relationships aren't just for romance.
That's right.
Um, they are most popular there, but they are in relationships are in every book. Maybe love triangles aren't in every book, but
Well, and this is a great place to point out that this is something that I've said for years is that fantasy writers could do a lot worse than to read a little romance. And mystery writers, should read some fantasy, and thriller writers should read some horror. Read outside of your genre and pick the best parts of that to bring into your story, and you're going to serve your readers so much more well by uh you know making your story three-dimensional and representing characters as humans that they are, and humans are full of complex emotions and all of that.
yeah. Yeah, and from a fantasy perspective, a love triangle is just this might sound reductive. People might not like this answer, but it is two people questing for the same thing. It just so happens that the thing they're questing for is also a human being or or whatever genre you're writing. Maybe it's an orc.
So reductive.
But if you can translate that, like you can look at that and see like what makes love triangles great. I can take those elements and maybe I have two people pursuing the same magical item in a fantasy quest, right? And how can I
Right.
translate some of that conflict and some of that character development to make this competition seem more interesting for my readers? That's what I was going for. Not saying that the tip of a love triangle is an object to be quested after, but but I'll just stop digging the hole now.
Yeah.
And with that, Hank, I think we've come to the end of
Yeah.
our hour for craft Q&A.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun. I'm
Mhm.
looking forward to doing more of these. This was a lot of fun.
So we will be doing this every 2 weeks, I believe is the plan.
Yeah.
So make sure you're subscribed, whichever platform you're on. The form for submitting a question is in the email that went out today, but it will be shared again as we get closer to the
Yeah.
next one. Coming up for our month of events, Hank, I do believe we are back on Monday for our fireside chat. Um,
Yes. I'm trying to get my calendar up as we speak, but yeah, I do believe you are correct.
and a little secret for everyone, I will be hosting another workshop next week. But we will share more information about that in an email. So check your inbox
Yeah.
and make sure to follow us on social.
Yeah. And
Um,
apparently we are now streaming live on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as
everywhere.
well as YouTube. So wherever you spend the most time, make sure you follow us there so that
We're
you
there.
can, yeah, so that we can be there with you.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us. And Hank, thank you for sharing your wisdom.
My pleasure. Thank you as well.
All right. Bye everybody.